Well, Ms. Jacobs has warned you, I really love Caravaggio. Man crush is her term, not mine, but she's not far off. I'd also love to pause in our breakneck dash through our history, take a breath, and look at one painter in somewhat more depth. My man crush aside, Caravaggio seems a good choice. He was not only an extraordinary painter, he was an extraordinarily influential painter. Past AP exams included a number of questions along the lines of, this painter was influenced by blank, and often the blank was Caravaggio. So I'm going to spend more time on Caravaggio than our rushed pace really allows, and I'll start with a teaser. This painting by Caravaggio is actually a self-portrait. You should recognize the subject. It's still another David. Which figure is Caravaggio? Let's begin watching an excellent video on Caravaggio and see. So, here's a painting that my husband and I saw several years ago in Naples. It's entitled The Seven Works of Mercy. Unlike your required Caravaggio painting, The Calling of Matthew, this one doesn't actually grab the viewer right away. It's awfully busy. And that Virgin Mary, baby Jesus, and the angel swooping in from above seem to me at least a little over the top. But if you study the crowded canvas, you can see all of the church's declared seven works of mercy being performed by a rather unlikely cast of characters. So, for example, in the background we see a man burying the dead, although all we can really see is the corpse's feet. On the right, a woman visits an imprisoned man and gives him milk from her breast. Here, a pilgrim, third from the left, and identified by the shell in his hat, asks an innkeeper for shelter. St. Martin of Tours, fourth from the left, has torn his robe in half and given it to the naked, crippled beggar in the foreground. Behind them, a figure that's been identified as Samson is relieving his thirst. So, what makes this a quintessentially Catholic counter-Reformation work? Here's a hint. What is this work and what is its message? Well, I hope you remember that this is the allegory of law and grace. One of the big disputes between Catholics and Protestants erupted over Luther's claim that salvation came from faith alone and not from works. The Catholic Church defended the central role of good works. Here, Caravaggio lends his support to this creed. Yet even as he defends Catholic theology, Caravaggio breaks with the traditions of Catholic painting. How? Well, Caravaggio's saints and Good Samaritans don't look all that saintly, do they? These mercy givers are part of an urban mob, crowded into a squalid city street. This was Caravaggio's Rome, a Rome of pickpockets, prostitutes, gamblers, and thieves. As your homework reading noted, we know a lot about Caravaggio, mostly because he shows up so often in police records. There's another important way in which Caravaggio breaks from tradition. Where are we, the viewers, in relation to the painting? Well, it seems to me we're in serious danger of getting kicked or sat on by the man in the foreground. The painting bursts out of its frame. The head and torso of the dead man, for example, and the body of the prisoner drinking from his daughter's breast are off stage, if you will. So note how this movie still reveals the director's framing or cropping of a scene. You probably don't even notice this kind of visual trick anymore. You're so used to it. But when Caravaggio first broke out of the picture frame and let the figures he was painting spill into the church aisles or the laps of the faithful, he was breaking new ground. This technique is what art analysts call open composition, as opposed to a closed composition where all the action is carefully contained within the frame of the painting. So what does this open composition accomplish in artistic and in narrative terms? We're drawn into the picture. We're involved in the scene. Caravaggio's paintings invite participation, not just viewing. In this famous painting, Paul is falling toward us, the future recipients of his epistles. If the soldier wearing armor and seizing Christ steps back a few inches, we'll be squashed. We can almost smell St. Peter's feet. And where's the rest of Holofernes? Do you remember the model for the maidservant was a woman who ran one of Rome's most notorious houses of prostitution? And the model for Judith was one of her top working girls? And that, as I've already mentioned, is another way in which Caravaggio broke with tradition. Okay, on to our required work. This is one of the most famous paintings in art history, and it used to show up in some form or another on almost every AP test. And now it is one of your required works, and for once I have absolutely no quarrel with the College Board's choice. But before we hear about this work in the video and analyze it on a few slides, I want to pause for a minute and encourage you to talk with each other about why this painting makes such a strong impact. Why was it so shocking? And why did it make Caravaggio's reputation as a painter? Of course, you can also argue that you don't see what all the fuss is about. So what do you think? What's the big deal? Our historian begins by talking about an earlier painting that Caravaggio did for one of his church patrons. You also saw this in your homework reading. Like many Caravaggios, this painting features boys, often in rather sensuous poses. And yes, his taste did mostly run in this direction. But this early painting also displays some of the techniques that would come to fruition in the Calling of Matthew. And that's why I'm starting the video clip at the end of Shama's discussion of this work. Before we get back to the Calling of Matthew, let's take a quick look at the second of the Matthew paintings, which you also saw in the video. So what do you notice about the composition? Once again, we see figures in the foreground spilling off the canvas and onto the viewer's space. We've talked about the artistic impact of open composition, but what do you think might be the theological or religious point that open composition is making? Well, the church wanted drama and spiritual power and an immediate impact on the senses. Caravaggio wanted all that too, and he delivered. But he also wanted to impress on his viewers that Christianity isn't about something that happened long ago in a galaxy far, far away. The men and women who followed Jesus, the men and women who condemned and crucified Jesus, we are they. In a way, Caravaggio channels Luther even as he remains committed to Catholic doctrine. He invites viewers into a personal relationship with the scriptures. But these scriptures come to life not by meditating on the printed word, but by entering into the experience on canvas. They are experienced through feeling more than intellect. Your textbook continuously uses the term dramatic to describe Baroque art. So here's a question. How is light used in a stage production, and how is darkness used as well? Well, if you think about it, in a theater production, the darkness is almost as important as the light. When we sit in the audience in darkness, the immediate distractions around us fade away, and we're drawn toward the action on stage. Spotlights tell us where to focus our attention, but we know that the shadows may be hiding action to come. You should know the term chiaroscuro by now. Tenebrism, from the Italian word for murky, refers to the use of darkness as a dramatic device. It's basically a subcategory of chiaroscuro and one of the innovations that later artists borrowed from Caravaggio, and a term that the AP Art History exam loves. So here's a detail from the Calling of Matthew and a companion and a comparison. Where have we seen that hand at the top before? It's Adam reaching toward God in Michelangelo's creation of man. And again, what theological point might Caravaggio be making here? We see Christ, the new Adam, undoing the failures of the old Adam. The similarity of the hand gesture is not an accident. So let's recap. In what ways was Caravaggio very much a Baroque painter, along the lines of what we've already learned about the Baroque? Well, like Bernini, he took lessons in lighting and staging from the theater. And indeed, Bernini was influenced by Caravaggio, whose work was already turning heads when Bernini began his Roman career. Caravaggio strives to make spiritual immediate, powerful, emotional, a gospel that could reach those who couldn't read. His paintings can capture movement with twisting figures and diagonal line. But how did Caravaggio take Baroque drama in an entirely new direction? Before you answer this, consider this question first. Why did the nuns who commissioned this painting send it back? Oh, this is not Filippo Lippi's Virgin Mary or Raphael's. This Mary looks old, tired, and genuinely dead. Her skin has a greenish tinge, her body is bloated, and what's with that screaming red dress? And then the word got out about Caravaggio's model for the dead Mary, a drowned prostitute. The nuns were appalled. There was a little too much real life. This was a painting not about eternal life, but about the tragedy of death. So you just saw this painting. It also appeared in the homework reading. It's easy to see the chiaroscuro and tenebrism in this work. The circles are probably unnecessary. Do I have circles? Oh, good. There's the open but what other characteristic Caravaggio features do you notice? There's the open composition again. Paul threatens to land in our lap. The groom, likewise, is an ordinary man, occupied with his job, seeming failing to notice a history-changing event right below him. Biblical events were real events in this painting, erupting into the lives of real people like ourselves. Caravaggio's last years were grim. He murdered a man, maybe over a tennis match, maybe over a prostitute they both fancied. At any rate, our anti-hero fled to Sicily, and then to Malta, and then back to Sicily, where he died attempting to return to Rome. The beheading of John the Baptist was painted for the Knights of Malta. It's the only painting he ever signed, as if in blood, as you can see from the detail on the bottom left. Violence permeates Caravaggio's paintings, as it permeated his life. But Caravaggio's graphic depictions of violence also make an artistic and religious point. So let's return to the video. And here's our final video clip, just to catch you up on Caravaggio's life. After he committed murder, he fled to Malta and was accepted into the Order of the Knights of Malta, who took him in, apparently, because they wanted some Caravaggios for their own church. The beheading of John the Baptist still hangs in that church. But as we'll see, the new stab at redemption did not end well either. Caravaggio never did reach Rome with this painting, a gift meant to honor the church for once again pardoning him. He's tossed off the ship and dies before he can get to Rome. The painting does arrive, and it served as Caravaggio's last confession.